proving that Bernie Sanders is absolutely clueless and out of touch with what regular people think. He made comments praising communist Cuba, condemning some of it, but still praising some of it. And I got to say, I think Bernie Sanders may have just lost 2020 before it even started. You see, there are a lot of people in America who fled from Cuba because of the communist regime. Not everybody in Cuba was upset. I'm not going to tell you how many people were or weren't. There are a lot of dissidents put in prison. But the people who come to America at least are the ones who are like, yo, Fidel Castro, bad. Bernie Sanders was interviewed on 60 Minutes, and he made a bunch of dumb comments. I hate to say it, but it's true. One of those was saying the education, the literacy programs in communist Cuba, hey, that wasn't bad, right? Showing he has no idea what was actually going on in these communist countries because they don't do literacy programs the way we expect them to be. They do indoctrination and cult-like ideology literacy programs. It's unfortunate, but I think it's fair to say Bernie may have already lost Florida, at least. And there are some other areas he's going to lose tons of support. Because I got to tell you, man, when people actually experience Venezuela and they flee to the United States, and people actually experience Cuba and they flee to the United States, you can't go around praising them to the people who know just how bad it really was. Many Americans maybe have forgotten because the younger generation has not experienced the horrors of much of what happened with these other communist countries. But certainly you can look at Venezuela and see how awful everything is. But hey, propaganda is strong. And they'll tell you, oh, Venezuela's only bad because of the meddling or some other nonsense. Let's read the story from the Daily Mail. Bernie Sanders defends not all bad Fidel Castro as he stands by old remarks praising communist Cuba and admits he's shocked to be Democratic frontrunner during 60 Minutes interview. You know, Bernie's winning urban centers and not rural areas. And it's not just about him right now saying the literacy programs were good. It's about the fact that in the past, he praised communist Cuba. You're going to have to go and explain to the second generation immigrants or the older people who actually did flee Cuba why you thought Fidel Castro was good back then. And now you got to justify why you're saying it wasn't all that bad now. Sorry, man, I think you've lost it. He could have come out and said, oh, you know, there's a lot I didn't know back then, and try and walked back those comments. He defended them. The Democratic frontrunner and socialist, 78, defended the communist regime as not all bad during a wide-ranging 60 Minutes interview, which aired Sunday. During the interview, he told Anderson Cooper, we're very opposed to the authoritarian nature of Cuba, but you know, it's unfair to simply say everything is bad, you know. When Fidel Castro came into office, you know what he did? He had a massive literacy program. Is that a bad thing, even though Fidel Castro did it? Now, let me stop you right there. I did not experience life in communist Cuba. I only have, secondhand accounts to go off of to actually talk about this. I did very, very briefly live in Miami, and I know it's not entirely fair to use this, but I'll say that, I talked to a lot of people when I lived in Miami, and often Cuba would come up. So one guy I knew used to actually, he was like, you can just take a boat. I think it's like a couple hours from Florida straight to Cuba. A lot of people do it. It's a fun boat ride. And a lot of people in Florida had fled there. And I had heard stories from the past. And they say it was horrible, absolutely horrible. So, of course, they fled to the U.S. These people do not have a favorable view. That's why they fled to the U.S. And I heard it straight from their mouths. Not the people who actually fled, but locals who tell me the stories about the people who fled. So, again, not entirely fair. I get it, but let's read more. Sanders had said of dictator Castro in 85, he educated their kids, gave them health care, totally transformed the society, you know. Is that what you want to do in the United States, Bernie? Because it kind of sounds like it, and that's horrifying to a lot, to everybody. It should be. Castro ruled Cuba for nearly half a century. A Cold War foe of the U.S., Castro's government imprisoned dissidents and imposed one-party rule on the island nation. He died at the age of 90 in 2016. When pushed further on the dissidents imprisoned in the country, Sanders replied, that's right, and we condemn that. Unlike Donald Trump, let's be clear, I do not think that Kim Jong-un is a good friend. I don't trade love letters with a murdering dictator. Vladimir Putin, not a great friend of mine. Bernie, you're not sounding good here defending comments about the great things done under these communist regimes. You have 60 Minutes here. They actually show the clip. The self-proclaimed Democratic Socialist won a decisive victory Saturday in the Nevada caucuses. That we all know. I'm not going to read over, the whatever. We get the point. I want to show you something surprisingly from, I believe, CNN. This is Ana Navarro Cardenas. She is CNN commentator, and she tweeted, "I was in second grade when Sandinistas came to power in Nicaragua. They adopted Cuban education model. The book's curriculum taught ideological indoctrination. Children had to recite communist, revolutionary, anti-American slogans. That's how communists teach people to read and write." And you know what? I will take her word for it. She's actually Nicaraguan. If she's saying it, I'm going to believe her. Now listen, I know CNN and these other outlets want to smear Bernie they want to smear him. I'll put it that way. The Russia smear and absurdity. So I will take it all with a bit of salt, to say the least. However, come on, man. We have more than enough historical accounts. We have more than enough survivors and immigrants who have fled these horrifying countries to know what really went on, or at least to say, in all likelihood, it's the truth. These places are absolutely horrifying. I can't believe, when people are pulling up these old comments from Bernie, I'm like, man, those are bad comments. But I can't believe he'd actually defend them. How ignorant and absolutely, you know what, man? How you can be a 78-year-old man and have not learned. I think while it's fair to say that Bernie Sanders has never been, for the most part in his life, the top 1%. He certainly is now. Actually, I don't even know if he is the 1% now, to be honest, because when you're calculating net worth, it's a $10 million net worth in America makes you the 1%, and an income of over 350 to 500,000. Bernie may have made that much in 1 year, but I think it's probably fair to, he's a millionaire. We'll put it that way. I'm not going to play the stupid 1% game. Bernie's a millionaire, but he just became rich in these past few years. But here's the thing. He seems to have grown up in a privileged, educated, elite life. I know that he wasn't the richest person in the world, but he was still a typically upper class politician living in, comfy Vermont, not the biggest state, not the biggest cities, but now he's a senator. He is absolutely a privileged elite. I know he was making a couple $100,000 up until his big movement in 2016. So I'm not going to pretend like he's a super wealthy individual, but boy, is he a product of the American bubble of comfort. And I'm shocked that someone his age would actually defend the things that went down in these places. He honeymooned in Moscow in like 88 or whatever, and he had good things to say about these countries. That to me sounds like a bad faith attempt to justify horrifying ideologies. They do not work, and they always do the same thing. If a communist or socialist ever says, oh, we condemn the authoritarianism, blah, they're lying. Every single attempt at communism and socialism has resulted in a purge of dissidents and marginalized groups. They are lying if they're telling you they're going to bring it about through democratic socialism. And then they also lie to you, like Bernie has, by going on the debate stage saying, I think Denmark is a great way to live. Denmark is a capitalist free market system with a welfare state. That's a big difference between what you've talked about in terms of nationalizing the means of production. Bernie Sanders had a plan. I'm pretty sure he launched his plan several months ago to give 20% of corporate stock as like a holdover for the workers to receive bonuses and vote on and things like that. Right. That's democratic socialism. They're not going to come in with guns and purge everybody. They're going to slowly force you into this circumstance. And then what do you think happens once they have one party rule and they eliminate the market economics? Yeah, welcome to the horrors of socialism. They start indoctrinating you. They call it education programs. Let me tell you something. Capitalism is anti-racist. They'll lie to you and say that it's not. The left likes to say the only way to end bigotry is to end capitalism. That's a lie. You know why? In capitalism, only one color matters, and that color is green. You will see people sell their souls for whatever reason. One of the greatest things in terms of actually stopping racism has been the free market. You know, people would say something like, I would like to make the most money possible. How do I do that? I need to cater to these other groups we're not reaching. And so they would change their product, sometimes to their own detriment. You look at these ultra woke feminist films. Why are they doing it? They've already got male viewers. They want a bigger market share, which means they need women and minorities. The motivation has been capitalism. The businessman sitting there, the big fat capitalist pig smoking his cigar, he's saying, well, we're getting the white male demographic. How do we get all the other minorities? I want money. They don't care whether you are a good or bad person. They don't care if race plays a factor. All they know is you've got money and they need to reach you somehow. So they prop up whatever they have to do. It's actually breaking barriers between different cultures and, cultures that emerged through different nationalities. There's I think it's fair to say a long time ago, a lot longer. Well, and actually in still many parts of the world, culture was very much tied to race simply because you had different races pretty much dominating most of their countries. Countries like China, for instance. Now in the United States, hey man, we're a melting pot and people enjoy all different aspects of all different culture. But here's what's mind-blowing to me. Capitalism has been the driving force that has actually helped do away with racism. So is it at all surprising to you that the people who want to eliminate capitalism are also the people who want to segregate cultures? The people who say you can't dress that way like another culture, they're trying to balkanize the United States. You know what that means? Reference to separating all the different races into little pockets. We had that high school girl who wore a kimono, not a kimono. She wore the Chinese dress. I forgot what it's called. And all of a sudden, these woke progressive leftists started attacking her for it. Nobody in China cared. They're like, hey, that's great. We like that you are adopting our culture. It's a cool thing. And for me and my family, I'm like, it's really great that we all adopt our cultures. That's multiculturalism. Yet the people who claim to be for multiculturalism are the same ones who want to get rid of capitalism and institute a top-down one-party state, which has no incentive to actually allow people to share cultures and become a melting pot and melt into that pot. Instead, they're actively saying, you can't have dreads. You can't wear this dress. These people are lunatics, and they're claiming to be the good guys. Bernie Sanders praising what happened with Cuba is mind-bogglingly insane. Well, we have this story from the Washington Examiner, which basically says this: Bernie Sanders may have just lost Florida to President Trump. I don't think he gets it. He is so blind. You cannot praise what happened in Cuba when those people who fled Cuba are in Florida. They're going to tell their friends, say, please, no, you don't understand how bad it was. During Occupy Wall Street, there were a bunch of kids, communists. It's Occupy Wall Street, go figure. And there was an older cop, I don't want to say older, but on the older edge of middle age, who was talking about how his family fled the Soviet Union when he was a little kid. And he said, this is how it starts. This is what starts, and it gets bad. And you actually had these 19 and 20-year-old communist college kids arguing with this guy about how it's actually a good system. And he was like, I was born in the Soviet Union. You have no idea what you're talking about, how horrifying and it was. People disappearing, no food. It was terrible. And they're like, no, you're wrong, man. It's propaganda. You know what you're talking about. He was actually from there. These kids have lost their minds. It's propaganda on their side. Just think about how insane it is that they simultaneously talk about multiculturalism, but their vision of multiculturalism is everyone segregated into neat little packs. That's not multiculturalism. In capitalist America, we've actually expanded civil rights and we have people mixing around and having a good time, and people have become less racist, more so than almost any other country on the planet. And they're trying to do away with all of that because they are crazy, dangerous people. But of course, Bernie Sanders, it's not just about Florida. So let me read a little bit of this for you. They say, Sanders has made winning Florida and its 29 electoral votes a whole lot more difficult for the Democratic Party. Anyone who knows anything about Florida politics knows you never, ever defend the regime responsible for why there are so many Cubans in the Sunshine State in the first place. Yet here is Bernie Sanders, the man with the clearest path to Democratic nomination, doing exactly that. The most damaging moment from Sanders' appearance on 60 Minutes comes when Anderson Cooper brings up his past comments on Castro. They then show his comments. Fast forward to the president, and Sanders is still saying the same things. I read that stuff to you. So Sanders responded, that's right, we condemn that. I don't have love letters with Kim Jong-un, etc. First, quote, came into office is just a remarkable euphemism. Castro did not come into office so much as he slaughtered his way to power, which he then held onto with a murderous, tyrannical grip until his death in 2016. Castro was an indisputably evil man whose long oppressive reign was bloody and terrible from the very start, which makes Sanders either ignorant or himself evil for defending it. I think Sanders is a moron. I think he's an absolute moron. Check this one out. In the same interview, Carol Roth on Twitter says, "This is like every startup that says it is going to make hundreds of millions of dollars in a couple of years, but can't explain how or how much it will cost. FFS, if you know what that acronym means." This is a clip where Bernie Sanders basically says, we don't know how much it'll cost to do, he says, Anderson Cooper asks him, how are you going to pay for this? Common question. Sanders said, I think the cost is 30 trillion. And Anderson, that's just Medicare for all. You're talking about a bunch of other things. And Sanders says, yes, free college, canceling public debt, Medicare for all, etc. He doesn't know what the cost is. Bernie says, well, I don't know what the exact cost is going to be. I can't give you every nickel and dime, but we have a plan for this. And then he goes on to say one of the biggest lies. And I got to say, I just think it's because he's a moron. He says, we are going to tax a modest tax on Wall Street speculation. The dude clearly has no understanding of economics if he thinks that's the case. You cannot predict how much you will make when you tax a market, and you cannot pay consistently for something on a market that goes up and down, and trade volume is a factor in how trade is calculated. Let me explain. Let's say you increase the tax on Wall Street speculation. So you got people, and I'm no fan of Wall Street speculation, mind you. I don't like people extracting value and driving up prices just by trading. But it's what we have. I don't know how you get around it. But Bernie is wrong. I am no economist, but I can tell you, as someone who has done trading a little bit, especially like back in the I was tracking the stuff in the big crypto eras when it was much more popular, and you can see how volume affects things. If Bernie Sanders says, I'm going to add a 0.1% tax on all Wall Street speculation, nobody will notice. Like Elizabeth Warren says, it's just 2 cents per dollar. Lies. Here's what happens. First, people who are trading have to factor in that percentage in their trades. And they're going to be concerned about whether or not they're taking a bigger risk, because you have to overcome that percentage gain in order to make a profit and beat inflation or whatever it is you're trying to do. We don't know exactly how it will play out. Maybe economists know better than me, but you might actually decrease trade volume. Do you know what happens if you decrease trade volume? Your tax revenue goes down because people aren't trading anymore. Let's put it this way. If you go to buy a candy bar for $1, what you really, really want as the government is for people to buy tons of things between each other, because every time they do, they get taxed. I have $1, I give it to you, you take 22 cents, give it to the government. You then take your remaining 78 cents, give it back to someone else, and then they give, 20 or so cents to the government. And as that money trades back and forth, the volume of the trade, meaning each individual trade, increases the revenue the government receives. In the end, if everyone trades that dollar down, the percentage being extracted will get smaller and smaller in terms of the percentage stays the same, but the amount of money to the government goes down. But they will end up receiving basically around half of that dollar if it's traded fast enough. Now, let's say the government increases the taxes to, 40%, thinking now we're going to get way more money. Then the person who's offering up the trade money says, I only have $1. Dollar's not enough. I'm only going to get 60 cents out of that deal. Okay, now trade volume drops. The one trade is made, and the government only ends up getting 40 cents instead of 50 cents. I don't know if I was able to explain that as cleanly as I'd like to, but the point is, if people stop trading, the government gets nothing. So when trade volume goes down, your tax revenues can go down with it. It's also possible that due to the increase in taxes, some people might say, I need to invest more and make more trades to overcome that loss. It's possible too. The point is, Bernie Sanders acting like he can predict what he's going to pay for while ignoring concepts like trade and the market, and not even knowing how much he needs to make, shows that he is either dangerously ignorant or just outright lying. Listen, I talked about all this stuff even in 2016 with people. But my biggest concern for the most part is that it doesn't matter what Bernie thinks. The president doesn't do what these people think the president does. It would be Congress that would pass these laws, and they probably wouldn't do it. Now, the president can veto for sure, so there is a lot of power held in the office, but they're the commander in chief. I am not a fan of what Bernie Sanders has been saying or doing in the past several years, flip-flopping and now coming out basically against the American worker with his immigration policy. He flip-flopped on that hard. Now we can see him actively praising communist dictatorships. Hey, look, I get it. He called out the authoritarianism, but then ignorantly went on to defend the reason that the authoritarian persists: indoctrination. Oh, the literacy programs. Oh, please, dude. We know what they do in schools. We know how they indoctrinate people. I'm not talking about schools in America. I'm talking about the communist regimes. They want to indoctrinate everybody. And you know what they do to those who resist? I think you know what they do to people who resist. They got a big ditch dug out back just for all of y'all. So if he wants to talk about this, he's already lost. I mean, he said it. It's done. So it's no wonder the Democrats are freaking out. Bernie's lost the plot. Or maybe he never had it in the first place. I'll leave it there. Stick around. Next segment's coming up at 1 p.m. on this channel, and I will see you all then.